So, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the 6th webinar on sustainability, on sustainable aviation, with a special focus on sustainable aviation fuel. My name is Santiago Ayaleiva, and I am the project manager for the CCCA Corsia project, which is the EU project to support the Southeast Asian states in CO2 reductions from international aviation. So, good morning, and especially good afternoon for the Asian colleagues. Good morning to the colleagues sitting here in Europe. We are ready to start. I think we have a very interesting topic today. Let me just make a brief introduction on the project itself, just to give you the context where we are deploying this activity, and then on the webinar itself, and more importantly, on our key speakers for today. We are very, very happy to have the panel that we will have today for the webinar. So starting a bit of background on the project itself. So the objective of the project is to support the ASEAN member state in CO2 reduction, and this is being done by the means provided by ICAO to do so. So the implementation of CORSIA, the development of the state action plans for CO2 reduction, and also the facilitating the tools in terms of data management or emission data management systems. And then going ahead as well with the new policies developed by ICAO. And here very, very opportune and very timely after the assembly with the long-term aspirational goals and obviously the role of SAF in this regard. So these are the areas of action that we have under the project. You have very same slide here with the different actions. In terms of practicalities for this workshop and also related to the project, so obviously I'm supported by the team, by the project team. Some of them are today connected. So Ralph Kosman, Operation Manager, Rebecca Franstein on Admin and Communications. You probably are already, if you are participating in previous webinars, you are already familiar with our faces and our names. So we will also, for the practicalities for the webinar itself, so what we will try is to address this webinar in a very interactive manner. Obviously, there are certain limitations as the numbers will be probably high in terms of participants. Then we are making use of a Slido, and this is an application that you will see pop in a second in your screens on the WebEx application. I will also explain how to create it in the relevant area in a new browser. You can also see the questions that not only yourself, but the other participants may be posing to the speakers, and we will address these questions at the end of the presentations of the different interventions that we will have. You can also vote up and down the questions that you find more relevant for you, so and then address them in the first place. The chat in the WebEx itself is also open, and I think that is very interesting for you to express yourself on how you see the topics and maybe interact in a more informal manner with what is being presented or sharing your ideas or your experience in your country. Going, as I mentioned, to SAF, to the Slido on SAF. So here you have the way to access to Slido. I mentioned you will be able to see it directly on your WebEx application, but also you can use a separate browser, especially if you are joining with a mobile device. That will be a more convenient manner. So just take this QR code or go to slido.com, hashtag SAF6, and then the passcode, the password to enter is X-ray 1 Delta Victor X-ray Bravo. And then you will be immediately in this application and in our session. So, not delaying more, I think we will have a good number of, or a lot of time for interactions with the participants and with the speakers. The topic for today, I think, is very relevant for Southeast Asia. So it's talking about the initiatives at the state level to upscale SAF and to go into the, let's say, into not only the benefits for obviously the environment, but also translated this into benefits for the country. And obviously there will be different dimensions for those benefits. SAF, as they will be explained later on, and you are probably very familiar with this, it's quite a significant challenge for organizations and also for state. And obviously there is a need of this a strong and close collaboration between all partners to make it happen. So these are the questions that we will try to answer today with the speakers. We bring the Indian coalition on SAF. This is the, I will not get into details, that we have the relevant speakers to explain, but it is the Indian example on how they are looking at SAF and how they are getting organized to take the benefits for the state and obviously to engage in a proper economy. So let me introduce our speakers and then giving them the floor to start with the content. So today we have very relevant speakers for the topic. So Adrienne Gibbs, she is the policy lead for the Clean Skies for Tomorrow. And she has been in this position already for a long time and taking, let's say, the role of engaging governments and organizations and bringing this into, let's say, this aligning together on the policy measures to create regulatory framework for SAF and obviously to accelerate with a view to accelerate the use of SAF worldwide. Prior to that, Adrienne was in IATA, in the International Air Transport Association, probably connected to aviation security, if I remember well. And then she, previous to that, was in the Australian government and Sydney Airport. So quite an aviation expert with a lot of background and good insights of the governmental and institutional aspects, but also with the reality of the sector. We have also Dr. Anjan is the Indian Institute of Petroleum, is the director of the Indian Institute of Petroleum, is part of the council, as an institution part of the council for research, industry research in India. And as you see in the video, it's quite an experienced person in fuel and in the petroleum industry with explicit and extended expertise in these different domains. Prior to being part of this, or to being the director of the institute, he was in a role with Honeywell UOP as regional commercial director for Asia Pacific, so also very well aware and very familiar with Southeast Asian countries and with the Southeast Asian partners. It's connected to renewable fuels and chemicals, and he holds a PhD from the University of Pennsylvania and has extensive experience in R&D and research and development in the area of chemical and energy sectors. And finally, we have Sonum Gayatri Malhotra, and she's the Indian lead on the policy side for the Clean Skies for Tomorrow. So she's the one doing the, let's say, the connection and the articulation of the coalition together with the partners, and they will explain more in detail her details and, let's say, her role. Yeah, it's quite an experienced person in the government in India. So she has held several positions, and as you see, the most relevant or the most recent ones in the Ministry of Finance in the Indian government, also working for the World Bank and the Center for Policy Research in India. So I think we have three relevant speakers for the topic, but more importantly, very much engaged in the articulation of the Indian coalition and also in articulating this wider initiative at a global level, as Adrienne will start explaining now. So that's all on my side. I really encourage you to place questions and to be active on Slido. I think it's a very relevant topic for the Southeast Asian states. We know the potential of the different states in the different areas, and the example from the Indian coalition, I think, is very relevant to take what may work, may be adapted to your context, or to complement something that you are already initiated. So please, Adrienne, the floor is yours. I can, if you like, move on to the next slide.
Thank you, Santi. And good morning, everyone. As Santi said, my name's Adrienne, and I'm the policy lead at the World Economic Forum for the Clean Skies for Tomorrow initiative. And as Santi also indicated, the focus of today's webinar is on the experiences of the India coalition as they've been standing up their work on sustainable aviation fuels. Just quickly, for those not familiar with the Clean Skies for Tomorrow initiative, it's led by the World Economic Forum in partnership with ETC and RMI. And the focus of this initiative really is about scaling and accelerating the use of sustainable aviation fuels by 2030 in order that the industry has a chance of reaching net zero by 2050. So we look at this chicken and egg problem of demand and supply and try to work with the entire value chain on resolving some of those issues so that we can scale SAF more quickly. You can just move to the next slide, please, Santi. Our work encompasses a number of areas, including technology, policy, finance, and just a few things I would mention that may be of use to you as you proceed through your national planning. Last year, we released a policy toolkit, which I previously presented at one of these webinars, and that's there to aid states and the industry as they start looking at what policy mechanisms may be useful in scaling SAF in a national context. And most recently, last week actually, we released the SAF Certificate Emissions Accounting and Reporting Framework. And that's a framework to aid in the voluntary claiming of voluntary Scope 1 and 3 emissions. But that's an important, I guess, framework to have in mind as you're looking at things like blending mandates and how voluntary and mandatory schemes may work together. So those are two kind of policy related topics that I just share with you now. And if you've got any further questions on those later in the webinar, happy to answer, or you can have a look at our website because both those publications are there. Our India work in particular straddles three of these areas: technology, regionalization, and policy. And it was one of the first pieces of work stood up under Clean Skies for Tomorrow. So it's one of the most mature pieces of work. And flipping to the next slide, I think importantly, the India Coalition has the buy-in from across the entire value chain. And probably Dr. Ray and Sonum are going to elaborate further on that, but that's probably been one of the successes of the India work, that it's both public and private sector cooperation that has made this progress in India. So my introduction is going to be very short. Happy to address any questions you have on Clean Skies for Tomorrow or the policy work that we do later in the webinar. But for now, I'll hand over to my colleagues, starting with Dr. Ray, to talk you through their experiences on how they've stood up this India Coalition and what they've learned during the process. So thank you again for joining us today, and we hope that this is a useful webinar for you as you do your own national planning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adrienne. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all the participants in this webinar. Speaking on behalf of India, I'd like to outline some of the initiatives taken at the state level on SAF. And I should say that the genesis of this work goes back to 2009, when the Civil Aviation Ministry in India decided that there needs to be a concerted focus on environment, and all best practices around the world should be incorporated into that slate of activities. So from roughly 2009, India has been working on SAF. And one of the primary reasons why it has gained so much momentum recently is because India is going to be a billion passenger market over the next 15 odd years. And without going into too much detail in the data, one thing we can see is that the number of airports handling large volumes of 10 million plus passengers is expected to grow from 7 to 47 in this period. So is cargo. And as we increase our volume of air traffic in India, we will increase our carbon footprint significantly if we don't do something about it right here, right now. When we talk to our stakeholders across India about who will pay for this climate action to decarbonize the sector, we see, not surprisingly, and having worked extensively across Asia Pacific, I have seen the same thing in Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, and I see participants from almost all the countries here on the call, including a familiar name from PTT. So when we look at the parameters, at least until 2 years ago, the price was still the biggest factor in deciding who to fly, which airline you will fly with, or even in deciding whether you will fly or take the train or drive. So from the point of view of industry, the airline industry wants to do 2 or 3 things. It wants to have enough passengers to be able to fill 80% or more of its flights, so have a reasonable passenger load factor, and have a reasonable operating cost against which it can make investments into passenger safety, into newer fleets, into all those things. And therefore, it is important even for the airline to have a reasonable price for any climate action that is to be taken. That said, obviously, if there is a mandate and everybody has to follow the same climate action, then clearly the price becomes less of a factor. But at the same time, if you make air travel very expensive, there will be an immediate pushback, at least for distances where people can drive or take a train, and then you reach a zero-sum game. Because obviously, if enough people start driving on their own instead of taking a flight in single passenger cars, we have not benefited climate action at all. The immediate option, even after we factor other things like more energy efficient aircraft and we include more energy efficient flight paths, work done by the US FAA. There's an iconic slide by Mr. Mark Rumizan from 2006, which is still used in various updated forms here in 2022, which shows that SAF is the only way to lead effective decarbonization. Also because even though we are seeing developments on electric planes and hydrogen, etc., for conventional long-haul safety-assured transport at adequate volume, electric or hydrogen is not yet a truly viable option. Also, there's already infrastructure in not only aircrafts with fuel tanks, which require jet fuel and therefore SAF, but also the dispensing infrastructure, the bowsers, the pipelines, the tank farms. So SAF is a relatively low-cost adoption to existing infrastructure, with one little exception that people don't always notice, that almost all the SAF today is permitted only for blending at 50% with fossil fuel. Therefore, there is still a supply chain headache where you will first identify SAF supply, test that SAF supply for compliance, then you will buy jet fuel which blended with SAF 50-50 still meets all the jet fuel specs. So the real desired state is a drop-in fuel, a fuel that I can get from renewable sources or biological feedstocks, which are fully compatible with existing aircraft and which I can drop in at 100%. That is the desired state. Today, that doesn't exist. But that's the roadmap we will talk about when we look at the Indian perspective. So why India? Now, India is an import-dependent country. We import a fair amount of our petroleum requirements. Close to 80% of our petroleum is imported. But interestingly, India also has a very high level of biological and municipal waste, to the extent that the carbon atoms we can get from our waste sources is almost comparable to the carbon atoms that we are importing every year for fuel. Therefore, there is not only an ecological case, but a strong economic case for repurposing Indian feedstocks into sustainable fuels, including SAF. And early adoption also gives you the benefit that India has set very ambitious climate goals, which include a 33 to 35% reduction of the emissions intensity of our GDP between 2015 and 2030. So given this domestic feedstock supply, there is a need to develop the SAF market within India. And that has been well recognized in one of the seminal papers for the India Coalition of Clean Skies for Tomorrow. And one of the authors, Sonum Malhotra, will be speaking right after me over here today. So I expect that she will speak more about that. But we did look, and this is from the Indian Ministry of Civil Aviation. This was presented by one of our thought leaders, Ekta Agarwal. She's an associate director in the Ministry of Civil Aviation, in the Directorate General of Civil Aviation, which is a regulatory body for all things involving changes in our flight regime. And when we look at the various perspectives that are involved for adoption of SAF in India, the major issue is getting the right feedstock supply chain. So when I look, for example, at Thailand or Malaysia or Indonesia, where feedstock is available, the key challenge is to ensure that the feedstock is sustainable. India then decided that we must have our own technology that can give us competitive advantages for production of SAF in India. Starting in 2009, as I said, when the research programs were launched, our first flight took place on 27th August 2018 under special approval from the regulator. This was a 25% blended SAF in one engine. The other engine was 100% normal Jet A1 or aviation turbine fuel. And after that, there have been a number of military flights. Apart from those 60 odd hours of military flying, we've recently seen a ferry flight with SAF from Toulouse to Delhi. And scaling up of biofuels in India is being done through a multi-stakeholder coalition, which you'll hear more about. These were the major flight events from our institute. We are a research institute. It's in some ways similar to something like Lemigas in Indonesia, or similar to the PTT Research Institute in Ayodhya. We are supported by the government for research, but we actually developed the fuel in our own lab, and we scaled it up to a production capacity of just 30 liters per day, but a highly consistent facility. And fuel made from this was used for the first civil flight and has been used for now about 65 hours of military aircraft flying over the last 4 years. So these are flight proven at different blend levels. And the product which produces not only sustainable aviation fuel, but also green diesel, which is called, for example, BHD in Thailand, or renewable diesel in Indonesia, by what we call the DILSAF process. And we have a trademark for this. This has been fairly well established through flight tests, and a demonstration plant for 15,000 liters per day, 15 tons per day roughly of SAF output, has been signed with an Indian refinery. This plant is expected to be operational by 2025. There is also, in order to make this fuel effective for the nation, we also had to set up a supply chain which involves farmers in remote parts of the country. The local certification body, Bureau of Indian Standards, notified a separate SAF standard so that the flights could be flown within India with a standard. And the Indian Air Force, a military operator, gave a provisional clearance where for any flight, you will then require a separate approval from the corresponding OEM. But as long as that approval is there, a plane can fly. So for example, a helicopter was flown recently with specific OEM approval. There is an ASTM task group that is formed for ASTM approval for international acceptance. And today, as I said, apart from this provisional clearance, we are seeing a lot of interest from international agencies and licensors, because we believe that this process, which is a truly national effort, it is not one institute's effort. It has been supported by civil aviation, by the military, by the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas, by the Ministry of Civil Aviation, by other corporate stakeholders. Today, that journey is in the differentiation for bringing down the capital cost and operating cost of fuel around the world. We believe it's the lowest cost process because it's the single reactor, no noble metal catalyst, directly meets the aromatics required, and therefore there is no blending step necessary. And it does not need very large plants. At just 100 tons per day feedstock, it is economical and competitive. This will allow for end-to-end supply chains and allow villages and rural economies to participate in providing feedstock. There are a wide range of feedstocks possible. Palm stearin, I'm sure, will be of interest to those on the webinar who are from Southeast Asia, but also used cooking oil, animal fats, poultry, fisheries. Fisheries is interesting to Vietnam, where there is a large amount of catfish fat available in South Vietnam. Also a number of different rotation crops. And also we are looking at using dairy fats and even fat, oil, and grease from municipal sewage from the city drains. We believe that the total capacity for these pathways is enough to meet SAF demand in India. Even at 50% blending, it is enough to meet the demand for the next several years. So we are confident that we are onto something that works. In the terms of the approval process, we are currently in the work group, and the work report has been submitted. This is being reviewed by OEMs, and we hope that if everything goes successfully in terms of balloting, then probably we should be through the tier 3 review and final approvals sometime in 2023. So progress within India is fairly well established. There is, other than our new pathway, there is an existing pathway for alcohol to jet. India is very big in alcohol production. So there are other companies in India, not only outside of IIP, like Praj Industries and Indian Oil, who are looking at building SAF plants in India with that different technology. Again, the regulatory system and the enabling incentives and supply chain networks are helping these succeed. You cannot do this on the basis of technology alone. There will be several more SAF flights in India. 2 airports have made commitments to net zero. The Department of Biotechnology, one of the government's major funding agencies, has announced a funding call for R&D projects to strengthen both the supply chain and the product ecosystem. There are several stakeholder consultations taking place towards an aviation fuel mandate. And my own laboratory has signed cooperation agreements with several airlines, which together represent close to 90% of India's commercial aviation capacity, as well as with the Indian Air Force. Apart from SAF, I should point out that airlines and airports are good sources of reusable carbon. So there is no reason to limit one's decarbonization efforts to SAF. We should be looking at all sorts of other things, whether it's the plastic that comes off a plane, or whether it's the food waste that comes off the catering, or the horticultural waste from an airport complex, or even expired ground vehicles. Instead of scrapping them, turn them into EV. We are seeing policy support for all of these within India, and we are seeing investor interest in all of these within India. And we would be very happy to support anyone else, anywhere else in Asia, if you need us to share practices or even provide technological support to implement some of these things. I'd like to say that it is not only humans who fly. This is the campus where we do our research. It is, we believe, one of the most scenic and serene campuses. It is in the foothills of the Himalaya mountains. We measure our birds and butterflies and our biodiversity. And we believe that all species, not only human beings, should fly and fly sustainably. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rai. And it very, very sensible words.
Thank you. I will
so
hand over to Sonum.
Yes, we can dive into the practicalities from the point of view of the World Economic Forum, from the coalition, and from the Clean Sky for Tomorrow initiative. Sonum, if you are ready.
Yes. Hello and good morning, everybody. Good afternoon. I am going to share my slides. Sorry. Share. Just a second. Just a second, everybody.
Yes. So I will, if you want, I can bring them on the screen.
Yeah, can you? I'm not able to share actually entire screen. Just a second.
No problem. So there is on the screen, Sonum.
Yes.
You can just tell me when you want me to move on to the next slide.
Thank you.
No problem.
Okay, let's start. Yes. Hello and a very good afternoon, good morning to everybody. My name is Sonum Gayatri and I'm based in New Delhi. I'm the India lead for Clean Skies for Tomorrow. Let me start by thanking Shanti for inviting me, Adrienne for the introduction, and Dr. Ray for that very comprehensive presentation. We always keep learning from you, and I'd like to tell everyone that Dr. Ray has been an advisor to the coalition from the very beginning. I joined the Clean Skies for Tomorrow initiative back in May 2020, right when the pandemic had started, when the world was in the midst of turmoil, but also a climate reset due to lockdown, as pictures were pouring in from around the world, looking at how cleaner everything was looking. I've been asked to talk about the coalition and how it came together, and I'm happy to share experiences with, as Adrienne mentioned, we work the Clean Skies for Tomorrow and within the World Economic Forum framework, work with different institutions, public and private. The objective of the coalition is to identify specific supply chain needs at a local level and develop a market mechanism and business models to ensure the commercial viability. In this case, for SAF production. The India chapter started at the UN Climate Summit, September 2019. At the Secretary General, the UN Secretary General summoned global industry leaders from the hard-to-abate industries under the industry track led by India and Sweden. Sweden's SpiceJet made a special claim on a global stage that by 2030, India will fly 100 million passengers on SAF. The slides that I'm going to present next is the coalition categorized in 4 parts. We have consumers. Can you go next just to show the slides? Technology, infrastructure and development, policy and governance. So I've been asked, so as you all know, that the idea behind these slides was for us to understand what are the questions and how to build a roadmap for the first time, looking at sustainable aviation fuel and what does the industry look like and who are the players. We first started out with an understanding that the end consumers are airports and airlines, and the international aviation industry, including airports, were looking to decarbonize. Also, at the same time, we were looking at what are the current policies in place, looking at biofuels, and as Dr. Ray mentioned, that biofuels are not new to the country. In fact, the ethanol blending program started back in 1996, and the need to transition was an idea that has been in deliberation for a while, for years, and the National Biofuel Policy, which was initiated back in 2018, through identifying what are the current policies and financial mechanisms. The coalition came together in understanding who are the players, what are the mechanisms in creating a value chain, a supply chain, from farmers to refineries to end users. What are the financial mechanisms? What are the policies in place? It was an entire, it was different sectors coming together to skill up and form a new industry. And that took a lot of research, as a lot of industries were new to understanding what sustainable aviation fuel could comprehensively look like. Of course, by the time I joined, a lot of the work was already done, which was a lot more smoother, because by the time we brought a coalition together, there were there were industry champions who wanted to see the success of sustainable aviation fuel in India. And for the last 2 years, there has been a lot of momentum, both internationally, but a lot in India, where you have the Ministry of Civil Aviation and the Ministry of Petroleum who are coming together, talking about how to build mechanisms for scaling, for demonstrating and scaling SAF at a commercial level. Can we go back from consumer? So when we started introducing Clean Skies for Tomorrow, and we started looking at industry leaders, these are the question on decarbonizing the aviation industry, the role coalition members can play, and going to different sectors. We needed to identify what was their role, how can they come in and support the coalition, and where do they fit in terms of doing the work, and what would a pilot look like? How does a value chain actually come into mechanism by playing by every industry playing a certain role? And so when the coalition essentially comes together in subgroups, in working groups, where we identify and we work together on a white paper that is presented finally for to deliver on the structure and on how policies can be adopted, and on how we can build capacity for policy building. So for consumers, we understood that it will be we have Indigo, we have Vistara, we have SpiceJet, and we have Indian Air Force. These are airlines in India, and Indian Air Force is already is flying sustainable aviation fuel blend of 1%, and all three, Indigo, Vistara, and SpiceJet, have started have successfully done test flights on sustainable aviation fuel from 10% to 25%, and the questions and the bullet points that are shown here are just a subset of how the consumer industry is looking at from their lens on how to implement sustainable aviation fuel. Can we go next? Thank you. The second pillar, of course, is technology maturity and adoption. ONGC currently is designing a 20 KLPD demonstrative plant in Mangalore, and they are using IIP's technology. HP, Geo, Indian Oil, Boeing are all looking at what is the best technology that can be currently used for India, and how to continuously ensure there's feedstock supply. And so there is overlap in terms of a value chain, as you can see, because if you go into the next slide, you have infrastructure and development. And it's true that airports have a different infrastructure development, and you have agriculture aggregators who work with farmers, from stubble collection to refineries, has another different mechanism on feedstock repositories. And we have from aggregators to think tanks to we're working with different state biofuel boards that that work on collection of biomass. Next. Here you can just see the second part of development, which is the biomass industry, and how to ensure that there's decentralized management supply of feedstock. Next. And lastly, policy and governance. And I know that Adrienne also talked about the supply and demand conundrum, and also Dr. Ray, where how much government can support decarbonizing the aviation industry, what are the policy levers, the financial levers, and how to ensure that there's structure and regulation at every step of the way. And we're still working with our coalition. We're now in the second phase of Clean Skies for Tomorrow, where we want to certainly dive deep into more granular understanding on financial measures, policy, and technology adoption to ensure that there is a systematic production of SAF for commercial purpose. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sonum. Indeed, I think the overall picture that you depicted with the different areas of action, and obviously how those are, some of them even question marks at this point as well, it shows obviously also the challenge to go ahead. I should stop myself of asking questions and giving the floor to the colleagues online. I see in Slido, and maybe it's a good opportunity now to share my other screen where you can see the Slido populating with the different questions. So you also can see the code, how to get into the Slido application. You should also be able to see that in your WebEx. I see there are some questions related to the organization of the coalition. I will start getting the questions from the most rated ones to the lowest. And then please, for the colleagues online, at any point in time, you can continue feeding the questions and probably reactions directly from a question or a reply given to a question. In terms of who will address the question, I think it's open bar. I think it would be better for you to chip in as you think would contribute to the clarification of the question or the reply. Maybe I will give initially the floor to Dr. Ray, and then complementary to the colleagues in the World Economic Forum from the Clean Sky for Tomorrow. So giving the preference to the, let's say, more to the government views coming from the Research Institute for the Institute of Petroleum, and then the complementary from the World Economic Forum. So the first question we have on the screen, I see is, who would you recommend taking over the lead in such a national or regional initiative? And how did you do this practically? I mean, what was your motivation in India? I understand this is more, so you have many ministries, departments, research institutions. Who is taking the lead, or how you organize this lead? Please, Dr. Ray.
And I think it's a very good question. The answer is obviously it depends, because each country is organized differently. Rather than being prescriptive, I would say that before somebody takes the lead, there should be a degree of national consultation and clarity on the strategy. In India, there was already clarity that we would develop SAF within India, because whatever SAF was being developed and was available globally was limited to 50% blending. So there was a technical and supply chain challenge. There was also a cost challenge. And therefore, we needed to do things that were more regionally appropriate. That is why maybe we saw that a research institute ended up being very active. But without the Petroleum Ministry, the Aviation Ministry, And indeed, without the large oil companies getting involved, we could not have reached where we are. So even when the first flight took place, one of India's national oil companies had to actually get the fuel to the plane. Another oil company is partnering with us to build the first plant. So I actually feel probably in today's global ecosystem, if a national oil company partnering with the appropriate energy or fuel ministry is able to determine whether they want to make the fuel within the country or buy the fuel from outside the country, that is the starting point. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think it provides indeed certain indications, especially on the need to involve all pieces, but they have a relevant role at a certain point. And you mentioned the ministry and the petroleum industry, so they all play a significant and probably you can call it a leading role at a certain point in the process and in the journey. I think that's quite an interesting. Obviously, the countries may organize in a different way, but there is a need of articulating this leadership. That's very interesting. So from the
Santi, sorry for interrupting. I think the presentation mode is deactivated. If you could bring back the questions to the screen, we see your computer screen.
Yeah,
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. So yeah, there's kind of tricky things in WebEx. So what would be, especially from the not necessarily outsider view, because I know, Sonum, you've been part of the government in different instances, but probably more detached from the industry perspective. What would be also your views on this involvement and leadership from the different parties in the either government or industry?
Thank you. It is a very important question. And when I joined the Clean Skies for Tomorrow initiative, these were exactly the questions that I had for the coalition. And as Dr. Ray said, rather than be prescriptive, every region will have its own organizations and institutions that play into a certain transition. For India, firstly we had already champions who wanted to see the success. Both Ministry of Finance and Ministry of Finance, including Ministry of Civil Aviation and Ministry of Petroleum, were already wanted to see the success of sustainable aviation fuel and knew that and know with our Prime Minister's vision of decarbonizing by 2070 that sustainable aviation fuel is the next step. It is the next intermediary step, and so in terms of region and center, both state and center need to work together, because to create a whole value chain and a SAF, a supply and a demand side, you need feedstock, you need and large quantities of feedstock, which can be from stubble, waste to energy. You need to where does the production of SAF come in? So it is a center's mandate.
Yeah, and I think it's sorry, please. Yes, as I think it's depicting especially the state initiative. I mean, it's the state and obviously the government in that state, the one that has to take the lead in terms of facilitating the ecosystem and the conditions for SAF to develop, and obviously to make it attractive for investment and facilitating the financing and the policies that will unlock the different showstoppers that are on the way. Let me, if looking at the numbers of the questions, there is one that is very close to my heart, which is the societal demand and how this has been perceived or was perceived in India. I think you were mentioning consumers and probably it was more related to the consumer of SAF, let's say the airlines, but the question seems to be more on the societal demand, so meaning I understand the flyer, let's say the passenger. So the question is there a societal demand for aviation to be greener in the Indian market? So I understand the flyers, the people, the passengers. Did the coalition, sorry, there is a pain hindering the view. Did the coalition perform any study on this regard? Well, that's an interesting one. Dr. Rai, or?
Yeah, so I think in the Clean Skies for Tomorrow work, where Ms. Sonum Gayatri can give more detail, this was touched upon, but in general, even when we started the research in this, it was very clear that society was not yet aware of the importance and value. And after the first flight took place in August 2018, societal awareness shot up, and people actually ask today, not only for fuels that are for aviation, but for other fuels, there is a significant interest in green fuels. And I think as the younger generation gets more and more educated and aware, we will see a much greater conversation around the subject in the next 3 to 5 years. Over to you, Ms. Sonum.
Hi, so we did touch upon it, but there hasn't been research on how consumers would fly green fuels versus on normal jet fuel, and that's because sustainable aviation fuel is 3 to 4 times more expensive, and it is for airlines. It is it's a challenge to privately or for governments to say that how should we price sustainable aviation fuel, and how do we cover the costs? So it's still very nascent as a concept to society, but as an airline.
Sorry, excuse me. The screen is not shared again. The questions are not shared yet. Sorry.
Yeah. Can you reshare the questions?
Excuse me for interrupting. Some.
It's funny because it say that is being shown. Let me stop and then do it again. Please, Sonum.
Right. So
continue.
essentially, I do concur with Dr. Ray that there has to be more awareness build up on sustainable aviation fuel.
Yeah, thanks. Adrienne, maybe, I don't know if it's part of the policy development, also this consideration of the societal demand, not in India, in the Indian example, but in a wider initiative from the Clean Sky for Tomorrow, if there is, let's say, a dimension to also raise awareness on citizens and travelers?
We haven't, as Sonum said, I don't think we've done any particular studies on this to look at how travelers respond. I think there's a lot already done out there globally on this topic. And as Dr. Ray mentioned, the younger generation in particular seem to be more sensitive to this issue and more open to this issue. I think, as Sonum also mentioned, the challenge at the moment is that the price is significantly higher. So there are a number of options out there where travelers can already opt to purchase SAF to inset the emissions from their flights. Some of those are done on airline websites already. Some are done through private sites where you can just say, I'm taking a flight from London to New York and I want to inset my emissions for that flight by the purchase of SAF. But it's almost double the price at the moment. So there is a significant challenge there in people having the will and interest to inset and reduce their emissions through this mechanism, and then the price factor that plays a role too. And that's something that is an ongoing challenge, and we hope that as prices come down, that will become an easier decision for consumers to make in doing that inset. But certainly it's an area we're interested in on our side, on Clean Skies for Tomorrow more generally. We try where possible to do general information campaigns and helping to make sure that both consumers, governments, the finance community all have the information they need in order to be able to start making decisions about the use of SAF. So that's kind of a general piece as part of our project. But a really useful and interesting question, I think, but not a simple one to answer. And but yeah, looking forward to seeing how this progresses, and that's why we're all here too. So thank you for the question.
Yeah, may I add a little bit to that, Santi?
Please.
Yeah. I think Adrienne raised a very important point in terms of the awareness barrier and the convincing to be done. One communication item that we emphasize very strongly is for people to think back to the costs of solar energy and mobile telephony 20 years ago and show that SAF is really going to have to take the same trajectory. So 20 years ago, people did not want to put solar. Now it's everywhere. Same with mobile telephony. It was very expensive when it started. But because it is so useful for the world, eventually adoption has taken place. And that's why to prime the pump, you need governments and you need investors who come forward and say, this is the next solar or this is the next mobile phone, right? So that's what we believe will happen with SAF.
That's very interesting as well. I think here in Europe, we have a growing societal demand, and that is also kind of a force that is complementing this development that is initiated by the government, by those initiatives. Okay, let me continue with the questions that we have online. So is this seems to be more technical, is the sustainability certification done locally? And what is the standard follow? I understand it's more on the sustainability certification of the fuel of the SAF, and against which standards, if it's ISCC or if it's RSP or if it's, let's say, other of those.
Yeah. So the answer is that at the moment it is done locally. The globally accepted standards for either ISCC or RSP, etc., would only make sense when you're producing to very large scales. For pilot scale production, we have used CIMA-Pro-based life cycle analysis for net greenhouse gas emissions and use that as a basis for taking decisions on whether a plane should fly on it or not.
Okay, thank you very much. I feel that's more on Dr. Rai's side, right? That's more technical question in terms of the specifications or the standards used for the certification. So there is another question as well on the connection of the Indian coalition, I understand, SAF, with other sectors. I think you briefly touched it when you were mentioning some of the initiatives in India and how this is not only contributing, let's say, to the aviation sector, but also things that can also be either as a part of a co-initiative or kind of a positive side effect on other sectors.
Yes. So there is an overarching national biofuels policy, and SAF is under that policy as of now. In the national biofuels policy, one of the major points for India, because India also imports a lot of edible oil. So in India, SAF has to be produced from non-edible sources or sources that do not compete with food sources. That's one of the unique parts of the Indian policy. The same policy applies for road transport, so whether it's biodiesel or green diesel or ethanol. And the same policy applies for biogas, which is used, for example, in gensets or in certain transport systems. Therefore, we can't discuss SAF without being very aware and without being connected to the other aspects of other sectors that use sustainable fuels. That said, you still need a specialized SAF approach because the aviation sector has its own unique requirements. Maybe Madam Sonum would like to add something more to that.
Just one other point, that while we were working in the first phase of Clean Skies, the blueprint, which is deploying sustainable aviation fuel at scale in India, we said exactly this, that there is an overarching national biofuel policy and the coalition came together and supported an extension of that policy for green aviation specific.
Mm-hmm. I see also it's, again, a government initiative providing the framework and the policy framework to develop all these initiatives underneath and having, let's say, an ambitious kind of a vision.
Extending an existing framework for aviation.
Okay, interesting. Good. Question, I see obviously the question of financing. You addressed few times in your speech. And the question here is how the scale up of SAF is in India is being financed. I understand this is obviously not a simple question and probably not a let's say a unique question, probably a combination. But please, Dr. Rai and Sonum.
All right. So up to the point where we are today, which is with the first plant announced, the entity announcing the plant brings in the primary finance. Any debt that might be required at a project level would come from ESG kind of funding, but we are seeing significant incentives and support from the government under the policy. Up to the point where the technology was made ready, it was funded both by government grants and by, I would say, direct contributions from the users, which is the airlines concerned, as well as the military, Indian Air Force. We're seeing a fairly large sort of partnership or contribution from everybody. Clearly, everyone wants this to succeed. Back to you, Ms. Sonum.
I feel like I don't have anything to add right now because we're still deliberating and ensuring that how does the government and how with support of the coalition, which is a subset of the industry, mobilize financial measures to scale sustainable aviation fuel. And as Dr. Ray said, at this point, we are at a demonstrative stage where we have small plants being and these are currently at design phase.
I see the let's say the initial phase has been financed through government and industry initiatives or industry collaboration, and obviously the full scale up has to be articulated in with different mechanisms or with additional mechanisms to make it sustainable in the financial terms, and also to provide, let's say, certainty to the investors and all these elements that come together. I think it will be very interesting. I'm anticipating a bit, but we are also inviting the World Economic Forum and the Clean Sky for Tomorrow on the financing element. Obviously, this is more at the earlier stages, but it will be another webinar in our series of webinars that colleagues from Adrienne and Sonum will lead. Okay, I'm looking at the time. I think we can afford 2-3 minutes beyond the hour if our speakers agree. We have two questions more. How is reporting of SAF organized? Through CORSIA reporting templates. So I understand is the claiming of the reduction of CO2, or what is the, let's say, the articulation in the Indian coalition, or how it is being planned if it's not happening yet?
Right. I think the answer is straightforward. Yes, it's through CORSIA reporting templates, which is primarily for international aviation, keeping in mind that all the SAF flights except one ferry flight have been domestic flights. That reporting is purely being logged in the Ministry of Petroleum data records, but the impact is not yet substantial enough to be really of meaningful value to the CORSIA data. We expect that when the first commercial plant is operational about 2 years from now, that's the time that you'll see a movement of the needle.
Interesting. Also, it's one of the elements for the end users, for the airlines to, let's say, to commit to ensure that they have this, they can claim the CO2 reduction by using SAF, and how this mechanism is being articulated either through the alleviation of offsets or through a direct reduction. And then the final question, if please, Ralph, Rebecca, see if in the chat in the webinar, I see Adrienne has been pasting some links on the blueprint and probably some other documents that would be of relevance for the participant. See if there is any question also through the chat. I will be reading the last one I have on WebEx. Sorry, on Slido. So is India fully independent and or also relying on external support and supplies like feedstock technology? I think that if I understood well, Dr. Rai, is the intention was to be fully independent.
Yeah, I think when we started in 2009, that was the intention, but at that time, CORSIA had not yet happened. As I mentioned on one of the slides, Gevo, which is an international technology provider, has partnered with an Indian technology provider, which is Praj, and LanzaTech, which is also an international technology provider, has partnered with Indian Oil. So I would say India is very open to whatever is required today to meet its obligations under CORSIA and also to decarbonize as fast as possible. So the indigenous technology should have. It is not the only driver of SAF adoption in India, but certainly we are avoiding trying to bring in feedstocks from abroad because the longer the kilometers over which you transport feedstocks, the more the carbon footprint of that freight. So at least the idea today is domestic feedstocks, best available technology. I'd say that's the headline.
Okay, that's interesting also in order to build a state case or the country case, but not being obviously disconnected from what is happening around and what is profitable also and beneficial for the country. I think that is a very relevant example for Southeast Asia, where because of the different profiles of the countries, there may be either more feedstock producer or technology or user, and there is a potential for organizing, let's say, this collaboration around the SAF while respecting and being, let's say, at national level clear on their policies and commitments, but still finding the synergies at regional level, or at least in partnership with certain countries. I think that will be very, very sensible. Okay, I see there is no more questions in Slido. Please, Rebecca, Ralph, tell me if you can see something on the WebEx chat.
No additional questions. Santi. Adrienne shared the linked information to the World Economic Forum website. Thank you very much, Adrienne. And we have just repeated that we're going to share the presentation of today, the webinar of today. We are recording it, so everybody can see it again on our website, and we're also sharing the presentations that we have enjoyed today on our website soon.
Okay, so then it's for me to thank very much the speakers today. I think it has been very, very interesting explanations on how the Indian coalition has been first initiated, and I think the motivation as well is quite important for the states to reflect, and the role of the different organizations to articulate. I mean, the World Economic Forum providing this overall initiative, facilitating the connection with the stakeholders, and then also facilitating the dialogue at national level, which I understand is also one of the, let's say, the added values of the coalition, to put everybody together with a common goal and sharing those, let's say, different vectors of either expertise or financing or policy development that are necessary to develop SAF. So thanks a lot. I know it's quite challenging connecting from remote areas. I know that you are in different places and you have made yourself available for this slot, and it's very, very appreciated, very much appreciated by the project team, and I'm sure by the attendees that have participated today. So just a very last closing slide on my side to say that there will be an upcoming webinar on the 3rd of November. This one will be focused on environmental reporting. So my colleagues from the Environmental Protection Department in EASA will explain not only, they will use the example of the European Aviation Environmental Report, but they will more reflect on the role of this report and, I mean, what is the value of such a report for group of countries or for the countries that are reporting to their either public or stakeholders or policymakers on the environmental performance of the country or region. Then there will be some others that you have on the screen that will be advice. Just advancing what I mentioned, the one on financing. I think this is the very important topic after the assembly, how to finance this transformation of the sector towards sustainable aviation, and what is the role of the different institutions and the different elements in the country or in the international sphere to finance and to facilitate SAF. So Dr. Rai, Adrienne, and Sonum, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for your contribution today, and have a very good end of the day, and for the ones in Europe, longer, and have lunch, and good afternoon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
made it.
Geht's jetzt alles okay bei dir? Alles